You didn't need it anyway, my father said casually through the phone, as if he hadn't just admitted to stealing my entire college fund. Besides, what's done is done. No point in getting upset now. I stood in my tiny London apartment, gripping my phone. How much is left? I asked, keeping my voice steady even as my hand shook. None of it, honey, he said. I had some debts to clear up, but don't worry, you're smart. You'll figure something out. Figure something out. As if I had a choice. As if he hadn't just stolen 4 years of my hard work, the scholarships, the part-time jobs, the careful savings, and I'd been powerless to stop him, stuck studying abroad while he emptied the account he still had access to as a co-signer. I see, I said quietly. Well, good luck with that. That's my girl, he said, mistaking my calm for acceptance. Always practical, just like your old dad. Listen, I've got to run. Meeting some friends for drinks. We'll talk soon. Meeting friends for drinks, with my money, my future. I sank into the chair at my small desk, staring out at the London street I had fallen in love with during my semester abroad. 3 months left until I had to return home. 3 months to figure out how to salvage my senior year after my own father had pulled the rug out from under me. My phone buzzed again. A text from him. Don't mention this to your mom or grandmother. No need to worry them. Of course, he didn't want them to know. Just like he hadn't wanted them to know about his gambling debts, his failed business ventures, his habit of borrowing money he never repaid. I opened my laptop and started making a list. First, documentation. Bank statements showing the account's history, proof of my deposits, scholarship records. Then research, legal resources, financial aid options, potential part-time jobs. My father had always underestimated me, treated me like a backup plan. Good thing you're pretty, he'd say when I brought home straight A's, as if my achievements meant less than my appearance. You can always marry rich if college doesn't work out, but I hadn't worked this hard just to let him derail my future. He thought I was being practical when I didn't argue. He had no idea that practical was exactly what he should fear. Over the next week, I pieced together the extent of his betrayal. The account had held just over $42,000, money I had earned through scholarships, summer jobs, and strict budgeting. He had drained it in a series of small withdrawals over the past month, each one just under the limit that would trigger a red flag. One evening, my roommate Emma found me surrounded by bank statements. "Your father did what?" she exclaimed, reading over my shoulder. "Can't you report him for theft?" "The account was in his name too," I said. "Legally, he had every right to access it. I just never thought he actually would. I should have known better. I should have remembered how he borrowed my birthday money as a child, always promising to pay it back but never did. How he had tried to convince me to take out extra student loans in my name, claiming he'd help me repay them. My phone kept buzzing. More texts from him. "Don't stress about the money. You worry too much. Maybe this is a sign you should take a break from school. I know some guys who could get you a modeling job. Better money than that degree." Every message made it clearer. He had never valued my education, my independence, my future. To him, I was just another resource to exploit, another safety net for his poor choices. I started making calls to my university's financial aid office, to legal aid services, to my grandmother who had always supported my education. I didn't tell them everything, not yet. I just gathered information, assessed my options. Then another call from him. "Hey princess, quick question. You wouldn't happen to have any other savings accounts, would you?" His tone was light, almost joking. "Just wondering, since you're always so good with money." The casual entitlement in his voice made my blood boil, but I kept my tone just as light. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, no reason. Just thinking about your future. You know how dads are. Thinking about my future, like he had when he drained my college fund. Like he had when he tried to discourage me from studying abroad, claiming I was abandoning family obligations. Sorry, Dad. In class now. Talk later. I hung up and opened my laptop, adding another item to my growing list. Close any remaining accounts he might know about. Transfer everything to a new bank. That evening, I received an email from my grandmother. Called your father today. He seemed nervous when I asked about your college fund. Is everything okay? I smiled, picturing his discomfort. He had always feared my grandmother, the only person who ever held him accountable. "Can we talk?" I wrote back. "There's something you should know." Her response was immediate and fierce. After hearing the full story, she called an emergency family meeting, without my father present. "That man," she fumed over our video call, my mother and aunt sitting beside her, "has gone too far this time, stealing from his own daughter." I watched their faces as I shared the bank statements, the text messages, and the casual way he had dismissed my future. My mother's hands trembled as she read his messages. "I had no idea," she whispered. "He told me you decided to take a break from school, that you were thinking about moving back home." Of course he had. My father was always good at twisting the truth to suit his needs. How many times had he reinterpreted my achievements to make them about him? How often had he taken credit for my success while secretly undermining it? "I've been documenting everything," I told them. "Every withdrawal, every message, every call. I'm not letting him get away with this." My aunt, a lawyer, leaned forward. "The account issue is tricky since he was a co-signer, but there might be other angles. Has he made any promises in writing about repaying the money?" I pulled up more screenshots, emails where he acknowledged the money was for my education, texts where he casually mentioned paying me back someday. "Perfect," my aunt said. "Not legally binding, but excellent leverage." "What comes next?" my mother asked. "Next," my grandmother declared, "we make Gregory realize exactly what he's done, and to whom he's done it." The plan came together quickly. My grandmother would confront him first, letting him know the family was aware of his actions. My aunt would draft a formal demand letter outlining his options for restitution, and my mother, finally, would file for the divorce she had hesitated over for years. "He's always underestimated you," my grandmother said. "Treated you like an extension of himself instead of your own person. Time to show him who you really are." That night, my father called again. "Your grandmother seemed upset today," he said carefully. "You didn't tell her anything, did you?" "About what, Dad? The college fund you stole? The future you tried to derail? Or just your general belief that my education means nothing compared to your bar tab?" Silence. Then, "Now, Princess?" "Don't call me Princess. Don't call me at all. Everything goes through Aunt Sarah from now on." "Sarah? Why would your aunt need to be involved?" "Because she's a lawyer, Dad, and you're about to need one too." His reaction was predictable: denial, then anger, then desperate attempts at manipulation. "You're blowing this out of proportion. It was just money. Family is more important than money." I forwarded each message to my aunt without responding. Let him dig his hole deeper. His next move was to show up at my grandmother's house, where I was staying until my flight back to London. She didn't let him pass the front porch. "How dare you?" she demanded, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Stealing your daughter's college fund. Have you no shame?" "Mother, please," he tried, lowering his voice. "This is a family matter." "Exactly, and you've betrayed your family. Now leave before I call the police." He left, but the texts kept coming. "Your grandmother has turned you against me. I'm your father. You owe me respect. After everything I've done for you." I thought about everything he had actually done for me, how he had tried to discourage my academic achievements, how he had borrowed my childhood savings, how he had treated my success as something he could cash in on whenever he needed. Then his final blow, a call, furious after receiving my aunt's demand letter via certified mail. "You can't sue your own father." "Watch me," I said, then hung up. The family fallout was spectacular. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years called to express their disgust. His sister, my Aunt Patricia, shared how he had even taken money from her children's birthday cards. "He's always been like this," she said, "taking what isn't his and expecting forgiveness just because he's family." My mother finally filed for divorce, citing financial infidelity among other reasons. During their first hearing, his pattern of stealing from me came to light. "You emptied your daughter's college fund to pay off gambling debts?" the judge asked, incredulous. "I was going to pay it back," he protested weakly. "With what money?" "According to these statements, you haven't held a steady job in 3 years." His carefully crafted image of the fun-loving, generous father crumbled. Every attempt to defend himself only exposed more of his true nature. The university's financial aid office proved surprisingly helpful once they understood my situation. They helped secure emergency funding and worked out a payment plan for my final year. My grandmother insisted on covering what she could, though I hesitated to accept. "Unlike your father," she said firmly, "I understand the value of education and keeping promises." My father responded to the demand letter by claiming he was broke, insisting he had no way to repay what he had taken. Then my aunt found evidence of his new car purchase, vacation photos he had posted on social media, and his still active country club membership. "He's not broke," she explained. "He's just good at hiding assets, but not good enough." His text messages grew more desperate. "You're ruining my life. My own daughter turning against me like this. I raised you better." Each message exposed more of his true colors. The loving father act was gone, replaced by manipulation. The final straw came when he tried to turn my younger cousins against me, claiming I was trying to bankrupt him out of spite. Instead, they sent me screenshots of his messages, adding to my growing file of evidence. "Remember when Uncle Greg told us our college funds were safe with him?" My cousin Jake wrote. "Guess we know what that meant." With my aunt's help, they secured their accounts before he could strike again. One by one, his pattern of financial abuse was being exposed. During my mother's divorce proceedings, more revelations surfaced. He had been hiding money for years, taking out loans in her name, even attempting to remortgage the house without her knowledge. He's been treating the whole family like his personal ATM, my mother realized, and we all just kept making excuses for him. My grandmother arranged another family meeting, again without him. Relatives shared stories of unpaid loans, broken promises, and betrayed trust. Each story strengthened our resolve. "He's always relied on family loyalty to shield him from consequences," my aunt observed. "It's time to show him that loyalty goes both ways." The consequences hit him like dominoes. First, my mother's divorce attorney uncovered his hidden accounts, leading to a far larger settlement than he had anticipated. Then, my aunt's legal pressure forced him to agree to a repayment plan for my stolen funds, with interest. His carefully constructed facade shattered completely when the family learned he had been borrowing money from elderly relatives, promising high returns on fake investments. "A regular Ponzi scheme," my aunt muttered, adding more evidence to her growing file. His text messages shifted from anger to pleading. "I'm still your father. We can work this out. Everyone makes mistakes. Why can't you forgive me? What will people think of you treating your dad this way?" I thought about all the times he had used guilt to control me, twisting every situation to make himself the victim. Not anymore. Through my grandmother's connections, I secured a part-time job that allowed me to finish my degree while working. My professors, understanding my situation, helped arrange a flexible schedule. Every small victory felt like a step further from his influence. The family's support surprised me. Cousins shared their own stories of his financial manipulation. Aunts and uncles who had once enabled him now stood firmly against him. Even distant relatives reached out with encouragement. "Your father called," my grandmother told me one evening. "Tried to convince me to talk you out of the repayment plan, said it was destroying the family. He destroyed it himself when he stole from his own daughter," my grandmother said. My father's last attempt at manipulation was showing up at my graduation, uninvited, unwelcome, but determined to play the role of proud father. "That's my girl," he announced loudly to anyone who would listen. "Gets her business sense from me." Aunt Sarah had him escorted out before the ceremony even began. "Your success belongs to you," she told me afterward. "He doesn't get to claim credit for what he tried to prevent." A year after our confrontation over my stolen college fund, my father's carefully constructed world had completely unraveled. The divorce had exposed his financial schemes. Former friends who had invested in his business ventures were demanding answers. Relatives he had borrowed from were taking legal action. My grandmother hosted my graduation party, a celebration not just of my academic achievement but of my independence. Friends and family gathered to support me, many sharing their own stories of standing up to manipulative parents. "Your father called me yesterday," my mother said during the party. "Wanted to know if I'd talk to you about dropping the repayment plan, said he's learned his lesson." "Has he?" I asked, thinking of his latest social media posts, still showing him living beyond his means, still pretending everything was fine. "No," she sighed. He's learned he can't manipulate you anymore. That's not the same thing. The repayment plan my aunt had arranged was strict. Monthly payments deducted directly from his paycheck, no excuses accepted. He had finally been forced to get a real job after his schemes dried up. His previous lifestyle was impossible to maintain now that no one would lend him money. It's not fair, he complained in his last email. I'm your father. You're supposed to love me unconditionally. Love isn't a blank check, I replied, my final direct communication with him. And conditions are what happen when you break trust. My career was taking off. I had secured a position with a top firm in London, my degree and determination opening doors I once thought closed. Each success felt sweeter knowing I had earned it entirely on my own terms. My grandmother had become my strongest ally, her fierce protection a stark contrast to my father's self-serving love. He called again, she told me over Sunday dinner. Wanted to know if you'd gotten that job in London. Said he'd love to visit once you're settled. To visit or to ask for money, I asked, already knowing the answer. Both, probably. I told him you're done funding his lifestyle. The family dynamic had shifted permanently. Relatives who had once enabled him now warned each other about his latest schemes. Aunt Patricia even started a family group chat to track his manipulation attempts. He tried to convince my son to co-sign a car loan, she reported one day. Told him it would help build his credit. Sound familiar? It did. He had tried the same tactic with me at 18, attempting to saddle me with debt before I had even started college. Back then, my grandmother had intercepted the paperwork and warned me about predatory practices, even from family members. Now watching his world shrink as mine expanded, I didn't feel victory, just validation. Every payment he made, forced by legal pressure rather than paternal responsibility, proved what I had always known. He was capable of doing the right thing. He just never thought he had to. My success had become my protection. The more I achieved, the less power he had over my future. The degree he tried to derail now hung proudly on my wall. Each accomplishment was a reminder that his greatest mistake wasn't stealing my money, it was underestimating my resolve. Returning to London marked a new chapter. The firm had offered me not just a job, but a future I had built despite his attempts to derail it. My small flat in the city became a symbol of independence, paid for with my own money, decorated to my own taste, free from any influence he might try to claim. His attempts to maintain contact became increasingly transparent. First came the birthday card, the first he had sent in years, with a carefully worded message about how proud he was of our achievements. Did you see how he signed it? My mother asked over the phone. Love, Dad, your biggest supporter. The audacity of that man, I muttered. Then came the social media posts, old family photos, carefully captioned to make him seem like a devoted father who had sacrificed everything for his daughter's success. My Aunt Sarah helped me draft a cease and desist letter when my father's posts escalated to claiming he had invested in my education. He's trying to rewrite history, she explained. Make sure there's a paper trail proving otherwise. His response was predictable. More manipulation, more pleas for family loyalty, more hints about his financial struggles. But his words no longer had the power to hurt me. Through family gossip, I heard about his latest schemes. He had started telling people he had connections in London, suggesting he could help their children find opportunities abroad. Each attempt to profit from my success backfired when they contacted me directly. Your father says you're hiring at your firm, one family friend wrote. He offered to put in a good word for my daughter, for a small consulting fee, of course. I wrote back, clarifying that my father had no connection to my firm, no influence over hiring, and no right to charge fees for false promises. Each response became another brick in the wall between his lies and my truth. When my grandmother visited me in London, her first trip abroad at 70, she saw firsthand the life I had built, the career, the home, the future I had secured. You know what makes me proudest? She said over dinner at my favorite pub. Not just what you've achieved, but how you achieved it. You didn't let him make you bitter. You just got stronger. That evening, another text from my father arrived. Heard Mom's visiting. The flat must be cramped. I know some great hotels if you need help with the expense. I showed my grandmother the message, and we both laughed. The same old tactics, transparent as glass now that I saw them clearly. Should I respond? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She raised her glass. Darling, your success is all the response he needs. 2 years after the confrontation over my stolen college fund, my father's repayment plan was still in force. Each monthly payment was a reminder of his accountability. He had tried various schemes to reduce or delay the payments, but my aunt's legal oversight kept him in check. At a family gathering back home, my cousin Jake shared his own victory. He had graduated debt-free, his college fund safely locked away from my father's reach. "You know what Uncle Greg said when I told him," Jake laughed, "that I should thank you for overreacting about your fund. Said your dramatic response helped him learn an important lesson." "Did he learn, though?" I asked, thinking of his latest attempts to convince relatives to invest in yet another business venture. "He learned not to target family members who have good lawyers," Aunt Sarah interjected. "That's about it." My career continued to thrive. The firm had promoted me to a senior position, my reputation built on the same attention to detail and determination that had helped me overcome my father's betrayal. That Christmas, his card arrived at my London flat, thick with forced cheerfulness and veiled guilt. "Still paying for one mistake. When will you let it go?" I pinned it to my bulletin board, next to my degree and latest promotion letter. Reminders that his one mistake had failed to define my future. His signature, once a symbol of authority, now looked exactly like what it was, the mark of a man who had bet against his daughter's strength and lost. At my firm's annual charity gala, I was invited to speak about persistence and overcoming obstacles. I didn't mention my father directly, but I told the audience about the moment I learned my college fund was gone, not as a story of betrayal, but as a lesson in self-reliance. "Sometimes," I said, "the people who should support you the most become the obstacles you need to overcome. Their underestimation becomes your motivation." Someone in the family group chat, where my father was now excluded, shared a video of my speech. His reaction reached me through my grandmother. "He's still angry," she said. "Says you're using his mistake to get attention." "No," she had told him. "She's successful, using her strength to help others." There's a difference. The last payment from my father arrived on a Tuesday, the final installment of the money he had stolen. He had attached a note. "Now, can we be family again?" I filed the receipt with the rest of my documentation, the bank statements, the demanding texts, the social media posts where he had tried to rewrite history, not because I needed them anymore, but as a reminder of how far I had come. My mother, now happily remarried, put it best. "He thought taking your money would keep you dependent on him. Instead, it set you free." She was right. His greatest punishment wasn't the repayment plan or the family's disapproval. It was watching me succeed. Without him, beyond him, despite him. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You don't owe anyone blind loyalty, not even family. Love and trust are earned, not demanded. People who truly care about you will support your success, not try to control it, exploit it, or rewrite history to suit their needs. My father thought stealing my college fund would keep me dependent on him, but in reality, it set me free. I built my own future, not in spite of him, but beyond him. If you're dealing with someone who constantly manipulates, gaslights, or takes advantage of you, remember, you're not obligated to keep them in your life. Protect yourself, document everything, and don't be afraid to set boundaries. The best revenge isn't anger or resentment. It's living well, thriving, and proving, without a single word, that they never had the power to break you. Thanks for listening to my story, and good luck.